So who can tell me where we left off?
We were returning something. Return result.
Returning result, absolutely. So we ended up doing, let's change the lights in here. So let's take a look at what we have so far. We are declaring in our constructor list values, range span. We're sorting our array. We're calculating how many rows we need to have, which was some of the harder stuff that we had to do. And we're saying ranges.add a 0. In our toString, if we jump down, we're saying build a string called result, start an int called index, make result equal to a blank string, and while index is 0 up until while index is less than rows, let's add one to index, and in that we are adding our range span. So if we run this, I believe that what we ended up with was printing out just the list of our ranges, 1 to 10, 11 to 20, 21 to 30, 31 to 40, and so on. So can we run that just to make sure? Yep, so that looks good to me. So where did we leave off? Let's open up our graph. I think that the last thing we typed was ranges.add 0.
Yeah.
Why did we say ranges.add and send it to 0? So what is ranges? What type of data? It's an array list of what kind of information?
Integer.
Of our integers, exactly. So what are we going to use it to keep track of? Ints. What are these ints representing?
The numbers and like how many numbers are in each. Is it how many numbers are in each range?
Yeah, how many numbers are in each range? How many numbers are there between 1 and 10, 11 to 20, 21 to 30, so on and so forth? So we declare an array list. What's different about an array list versus an array?
You can add stuff to the array list.
Yes, you can add stuff and remove stuff from an array list completely. So when we declare an array, how big is it?
The size you set it
to. The size we set it to. When we declare an array list, how big is it?
However big, it's like 0, but then you have to.
Right, we start at 0, but we need to add however many we want. So the last thing we did was ranges.add 0, just as a test to make sure we can. Why did we add 0?
Because that's where the list starts, like that's where the ranges go, like 1 or 0 to 10.
So when we are looking in our constructor, have we done any of the calculations yet?
No. Yes.
What have we calculated?
Rows.
The only thing we've done is calculated how many rows we need. Have we processed our list at all? Have we gone through and said, this number is between this number is between that?
No.
So our constructor is just supposed to set up the beginning of our object. Just the baseline, what we need to start with. How many numbers, when I just make the graph to begin with and haven't processed it yet, how many numbers are there between 0 and 10, or 1 and 10?
0.
How many are there between 11 and 20?
0.
How many between 21 and 30?
0.
Why?
Why? Because we haven't done anything with this yet.
Right, so 0 is our baseline. So how many rows do we have? We figured it out, however many based on the length of our list. How many items in our array list ranges do we need?
We don't know yet.
Do we not know yet?
It depends on rows.
Yeah, so is there a relationship between how many rows we have and how many items we need in ranges?
Yes.
Yeah.
What is that relationship?
Well, you need that number of row. You need to go through each row, and say, like, this number of numbers are in this row, and this number is in that row.
Yeah, so if ranges is keeping track of how many asterisks we're going to have to put in each row, how long should ranges be?
As long as rows.
Yeah, they should be the same length, a one-to-one relationship. Right now, how big is rows?
Or no, rows is whatever.
Yeah, rows is some number, we've calculated it. Right now, how big is ranges?
0.
It's
1.
one. It's got one item in it. How many items do we need in it?
Rows.
So how do we go about making that happen?
Ranges that add rows.
So if we say ranges.add and send it the value rows, it is going to add one item with the value of rows. How many items are we trying to add?
The number, how many rows we have.
And what value should each one be?
0.
Yeah, we should start them all at 0. Because then as we go through our list, we see an item, we say, okay, this goes in whatever row, add 1. So we can count. So how do I say, all right, take ranges and instead of just adding 1, add however many times for we have rows. So how do I do
For
something,
loop.
what was that?
For loop.
A for loop. Why a for loop?
Because you want to do something for a set number of times.
For a set number of times, we want to run this. How many times?
Rows.
Rows.
So, are we doing a for loop in the constructor? Or
Yeah, right in the constructor. Because we're constructing this and setting it up at our defaults. It needs to be a certain size and laid out all with zeros. Just like if I was trying to build a house, I would flatten everything and then lay out the cement. I'm not saying that the wall here has to be 10 bricks high. I'm saying that if I'm going to build a wall ever, I need to just start with my foundation. My baseline is all zeros.
So we need to. So for rows. Anybody?
Yeah, Danielle's doing a lot of work. Someone else. We have a model for loop if we don't remember by now how to write one. There's
Yeah.
one right in our toString method. Ooh, what's going to happen if you say rows equals 0?
It's not gonna work.
When you say rows equals 1 or rows equals 0, what happens?
Are you reinitializing the rows?
Yeah, you're setting rows to equal something. We don't want to change what rows is.
Ranges.
So, what am I doing in the other for loop? Don't we always just need a temporary counter?
Mm-hmm.
So, do we usually want to create something for a for loop, or do we want to use something that we already have as our counter?
What is I equals rows?
Yeah, for int I equals rows. So, give me a new integer called I, and set it equal to rows. What's next? So what does I equal right now?
Rows.
Okay, so what is my condition?
I plus than 0, I minus 1.
I is less than 0?
While I is greater than 0.
So while I is greater than 0, I minus minus. Now we usually go the other way. We usually write int I equals 0 while I is less than rows at I plus plus. This is totally valid. Because it doesn't matter how we normally do it. What matters is we have our initialization, our condition, and our incrementation. So we set I to be how many rows there are. And we say while I is greater than 0, run our code. Once we've run it, subtract 1 from I. And what do we want to do?
Add 0 to ranges.
Absolutely. So we were doing this once before. Now we're doing it however many times for the size of rows. So now let's see what that does. We're not going to be able to see anything if we just run this, so let's add a system.out.print.
What are we printing out?
Let's see ranges.
Should I do it on the outside or?
You probably want to do it on the outside. If you do it on the inside, you're going to get printed out however many times. We only need to see it once when that loop is done. So let's compile this. And what do we get when we run? So the first thing that we have printed out is our list. The second thing is a different list. This one looks like it's all zeros. And then we have all of our ranges printed out. That looks right to me. We've printed out 3 things. How many zeros are in the second list? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. How many categories do we have? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Yeah, that's right. So we didn't succumb to an off by 1 error. Seems right to me. Okay, so now let's go back. We have all of our setup. Now, what do we need to do with ranges? We're done with our constructor. Everything is built the right way. Now, if we go to our print method, toString, this is where we're actually doing some work. So we had left off, we had started to look at this and commented it out because we couldn't figure it out. But I think maybe now we have a little bit better idea.
So we want to do like int I equals ranges again? As a counter?
So why are we doing a for loop?
Because we know how many times we want it to run.
Do we?
No, number of
Yes.
numbers.
So ranges we filled up with zeros.
Right.
So if I run a loop based on the values and ranges, how many times is that loop going to run?
0.
Never.
So what do we need to do now?
Make a while loop.
What's a while loop going to do?
Keep going until the statement's false.
So don't tell me what code we need to do. Tell me what the next step is. The last thing that we did was set up a blank list called ranges that's just filled with zeros. Why did we do that?
So that the numbers from that are produced have a place to go.
So that the numbers that are produced have a place to go. So what are we looking through? What is the information that we're given? Go ahead and run the program one more time. Let's see what we get. You're going to have to comment this out yet. So what is that first line?
Ints.
That is the list of random numbers that gets generated. So I see a 3 in the first spot. What does that mean?
There's 1 between 1 and 10.
So, there's that 3 goes between 1 and 10? Okay, what does a 6 mean?
Goes between 1 and 10.
Oh, it goes between 1 and 10. What does 10 mean?
Goes between 1 and 10.
That it goes between 1 and 10. What am I doing?
You're counting. You're adding.
I'm counting. I'm adding how many numbers fall within that range. So, what do I do with those? I just counted 3. What do I do with that?
You add 3 stars to that range
How do I know that?
Because you have 3
Where did I get 3?
from counting.
From counting what? When am I counting in my program?
When you counted the list.
Did I do that?
You went through it.
I went through it, but I didn't do anything with it.
You counted it.
Did I?
You just saw that was 3 and it has to go between 1 and 10.
But did I in the program?
No.
So what's missing?
You have to count it.
Yeah. So the missing step between what I just did and what our program is doing is that counting part. So right now we have a list of ranges. If the computer were doing what I just did, then the first item in ranges would be 3, right? Because that would be, it represents how many asterisks I need to print. 3 asterisks for 3 numbers between 1 and 10. So that's what we need to do now, is count that.
Okay.
Counter? To make a variable called counter?
Well, how are we going to go through and count? There are a couple of different ways, and a couple different places. We could do it in our constructor. We could do it in our toString method. It depends on how we want to access the data. Because this is a very small project, it makes sense to be in either place. If we were doing a bigger project, we would probably want to do it in our constructor because it's something we only want to happen once. Remember, every time I say print my graph, it's actually doing the calculations. So we would rather only do the calculation once and then just print the result. So now that I have a list of empty, just count of zeros, so ranges is telling me that in the first spot, there are 0 things that need to be printed. In the second spot, there are 0 things that need to be printed. All of these spots have 0 things that need to be printed. We need to change those values. Danielle, you have an idea, an epiphany?
Yeah, I just, we need to use a for loop because I was thinking, how do you add, like, you can't, like, say you can't add ranges.add 3, you have to do, like, ranges.add I and go through the loop.
Yeah, absolutely. So we need to go through the entire list one more time.
Okay. And where this for loop is or somewhere else?
So what is this loop about to do?
This one?
The loop that we're about to write.
I'm gonna count.
It's going to count. How many times are we going to need to count our list?
As many times as there is numbers in the list.
Right, but how many times am I going to have to accomplish that whole task of going through the list and counting everything?
Once.
Just once. So do I want it to run every time I try to print it out, or do I want it to run just when we build it?
Just once.
Just once.
So front end here.
So in our constructor, exactly.
Are we doing I?
Yeah, we can. Where does I exist from the for loop above us?
Only up there.
Only from squiggle bracket to squiggle bracket.
So int I equals what? Do you have?
I would say 0. That's a good place to start. How big does it need to get?
As big as the list, right?
As big as the biggest number in list? Or?
It has to go through all the numbers, so up until the biggest, which is right.
Well, yeah, but do we care what those values are yet?
No.
Or just what spot they are?
Just look back.
So how do I get to that spot in the list?
List values dot length minus 1.
Yeah.
So is less than?
Well, so while I is less than list values dot length or list values dot length minus 1, you tell me.
Minus 1, because that's the last one.
Yep. Sounds good to me.
Why is it minus 1 though?
Because if I say 0, 1, 2, 3, 4,
Right.
how many items are in that list?
4.
0,
Oh.
1, 2, 3, 4. There are 5 items in that list. We're starting at 0, but if I say how big is that list, you would say there are 5 items in it. If I say what is the last spot in the list, the last spot is 4, but there are 5 items. The relationship between that is take how big the list is and then offset it by -1, because we're starting 1 lower than we would think to be.
Good? I love that.
Looks good to me. So now what are we doing?
It's going through and counting how many are in each range.
Yeah, so first thing I would figure out is how to access the value in the list. Do we know how to do that? Feel free to contribute this side of the room.
Does that work?
So if I say list value square bracket I square bracket, what is that doing?
It's going through each spot. Like, start at 0 and go to 1, 2, 3, 4.
If I say just right now, no for loop or anything, list values at I.
It's whatever is occupied in position 0.
Yeah, it's whatever is occupied in that position, whatever I is.
Mm-hmm.
And how do we know that it's going through the entire list?
Because you're going to dot length, which is like the size of the list.
Yeah, because we're saying, okay, for all of the possible times we're going to use this, set I to 0 and go all the way up through every spot on the list. So that looks good. This is how we access a value in a list going item by item and say, go through pretty much every one. What do we need to do with this?
We needed to go through and find numbers of a certain range, add asterisks to the ranges.
So are we adding anything to ranges?
No,
I thought we were.
no, I'm not talking about the actual array list, but the idea of a range, like we have to add. Wait, maybe we are. We're not adding every single number to that range. We're adding it to the specific range. So if I find 3, and it's
Yeah.
3, then I need that 3 to be added to the 1 through 10 range, not just the range of the array list.
Exactly. So I don't need to add anything to ranges anymore. Ranges is set as far as size. We have categories, and we need to modify the values in them.
Okay.
So right now, all you're saying is look at this spot in the list, and then forget it. So what do we need to do?
You need to add it to that range.
Yeah, so how are we going to say that? So what spot in ranges does any specific value need to go into? So let's say I find a 14
Mm-hmm.
as the value in the list, which spot does that go into in my array?
The second.
Yeah, the second spot.
But that could change, couldn't it?
If you change the index.
Right, so it's not always a second spot. Nothing's concrete, it flows with whatever you
But
send
in this program, you're going to fix that, just like you say, like a 10 index. Like
No, we're planning for things that like 1,000,000 and then I want 100,000 index.
Right, but so how many spots do I have in my ranges?
Rows.
Rows. So I have the same number. So they do correspond.
Right.
So if I go through the list and I see, oh, this is a 1, which spot where do I categorize the value 1? What spot in my array does that fit into?
1.
The first spot, because it's between 1 and 10. How about 24?
Third.
The third,
Second. No, third.
1 through 10, 11 through 20, 21 through 30. So it fits there. How do I know that? Math. You just did some math. You asked a question to yourself. You said, where does this fit? Are we asking that question in the computer?
Right, but it needs an actual formula because it's not very smart. Right?
Yeah. So how do we do that?
Figure out a formula.
Do we need to figure out a formula?
no.
There is a formula. If we wanted to get very complicated, we could use
No,
my
let's
favorite operating. Yeah, we can
No,
use
let's
modulus.
keep it simple.
Let's keep it simple. Has anyone ever heard of that principle? They call it the KISS principle.
Yeah.
Keep it simple, silly. That's not what my French teacher told me. The last S stood for.
Oh, so you speak French.
Je parle français.
I'm gonna guess that means a little bit.
Since I speak French.
Oh. Clearly I don't speak French.
No hablo español.
It's okay. Hey, you conjugated it right. I was supposed to say no habla español. It's like you just said she doesn't speak Spanish.
Mm-mm. So, let's take a look. What do we know about all of the values in the list? They're all ints. Go ahead and run this program again. Let's take a look at our list.
They're all between 0 and the biggest number.
One, 2, 4, 5, 6, 6, 10, 10, 10, 12, 13, 13, 14, 14, 14, 16, 18, 19, 24, 26, so on and so forth. This is our list. What is strange about that list for random numbers being generated?
There's a lot of multiples.
There's a lot of multiples. What are the chances of random numbers being the same in a row?
Really low.
Really low. So why are those?
Oh, they're sorted.
We've sorted our list. So we know that if we start all the way at the left and we're adding stuff, what happens when I get to that 12?
It's the first number. Like you go down and then you like take away all the ones from 1 to 10 and then 12 to 13.
Yeah.
And it just goes down. So they're all like in order.
In order. So if I start all the way at the beginning of my list and start counting, if I see a value that doesn't fit in my range, I know that I'm done with that range. When I get to 12, can I ever find another value that's between 1 and 10?
No.
Nope. So let's use that.
Okay.
So what's the first thing I need to do with the value? Right now I know how to get the value. What am I doing with it?
Deciding what range it's in.
Deciding what range it's in. How do I ask a question? I'm setting something up. What is going on here? Is this in the range?
A Boolean.
A Boolean, how do we use a Boolean?
You declare it in the method or the class, whatever you want it.
So a Boolean is what?
True or false.
So where do we use that true or false?
In the method.
In what method?
Alright.
So where? In an if statement.
Oh, that too.
So the true or false is what our condition ends up being.
Okay.
So if we look at our list, we say, does this fit in our range? If it does, add 1 to it. If not, we've entered the next range, right?
So I
Yep.
is equals or like
No, so what are the values for I going to be? I is going to be 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, all the way up to however many items in your list.
Mhm.
So what are we actually looking at? If what?
If I is in the first range,
If I is in the first range?
or no, if the number I.
I doesn't represent any number except 0 through however big the list is. We can use it to get something out of the list, and how do we do that?
Yeah, it's the
Using I as the location. But what, so we're not talking about I, we're talking about the value from a list.
the
What are
number,
we calling that?
the index.
So what am I doing right here? List values, square bracket, I, square bracket.
And we're going through each index, like each position in the list.
I'm saying, no. If I say list values at I I'm not saying go through and do multiple things. I'm saying do one thing.
Go to this position.
Go to list values, find this spot. The reason it's happening multiple times is because we're inside a loop. But if I didn't have this loop and I said, give me the first spot in the list values at 0.
Yeah.
List values at whatever.
Yeah.
So if we want the actual value that we're talking about,
Use get value.
we need to say, go to list values at this spot. List values at 0 is going to be the value of the first item in the list.
Mm-hmm.
Anytime I want the actual value, I need to say, go to my list and pull out one of those values.
Yeah.
Which one? Whatever spot.
Yeah.
So we're never talking about I on its own. We're using I as the spot inside list values. So if I want to say if the first spot in the list equals 10, how would I say that?
Can you use get value, or do you have to make that?
What does get value, where does that come from?
I was just thinking because you were saying that we need to go and like go to the spot and basically get the spot, the
Yeah,
value in the spot.
We already know how to do that. We're doing that one line above it, aren't we? So if I want to know if the first value in my list equals 10, how would I write that?
Equals 10.
If what equals equals? Write that line for me. If, where are you getting index?
If list values are
From like
If list values, what? If I want the first spot.
list value 0.
List value 0. So write that. If list value 0, and how do I say, yep, equals 10. This is a full, complete if statement declaration, not counting what we're going to do if that's true.
Mm-hmm.
If list values at spot 0 equals 10, then do whatever. So this is saying if you go to list values and find the value at spot 0, and that is the same, if that equals 10, then do something.
So replace 0 with I, because that's changing.
Right. So the important thing is that if we want the value from our list, we need to specify that we're taking it from list values. Because we could also be saying, go to ranges or go to any number of lists. We're saying we want the value at this spot from this specific list. List values.
Equals like go through the ranges.
So what belongs in the first set of ranges?
1 to 10.
1 to 10. So are we going to say equals 10?
No.
That'll only work when it is 10.
So like
So what did we do when we were calculating our range span? Because these are very connected, right?
Mm-hmm.
So what is my first range? From 1 to what?
1 to 10.
Why is it 10?
Because our rows, whatever the index was sent to us, we did the list values, basically list values divided by the range.
Yeah. So it's based on what they sent us.
Yes.
So let's take a look down at our for loop for the toString method.
Mhm.
And what have we got there? How did we calculate those ranges?
Range span times index plus 1.
And
Range span times index plus range span.
yeah, so to figure out any range, I'm saying times the range span, which is how big any one range is, times the index, so which spot I am. So if it's the first set of ranges, the second range, the third range, and then add 1 to it to make it 1 through. And then the second one is going to be that plus another range. So I start with 1 going up to 10. Then I can basically add range to each of those. So if I have 1 and 10, what's my next range going to be? 11 to 20. What's my next range going to be? 21 to 30, and so on and so forth. So I want to say if this list value is between this number and that number, what numbers are they? Well, whatever the end of my range is, put it in that spot.
So that's basically.
Yeah, we're going to use those calculations again. So we say, if list values at spot I is what?
Between that.
Between, yeah, so we have a lower bound, so if it's less than the top but bigger than the bottom.
Yeah.
So how do we do that?
If I is less than.
Not if I is less than.
Why not?
List values.
List values are
Yeah.
the line we're on is less than blank and greater than blank. Add to some type of range.
Yeah. And now I'm not just being nitpicky when I say you can't call it I. If you say if I is less than something, what are you comparing?
A specific value.
And if you say if list values at I is less than, what are you comparing?
A changing value.
Yeah, so if you don't say list values at I, you're comparing just the counter. What spot we're in the list, not what the value of the list is.
Do we want index only exists in the two string?
Yeah, so don't copy and paste until we understand what is happening. So what does list values need to be less than?
The
upper range.
the top
Yeah, so how do we calculate the top of our range?
Range
span
span.
times index plus range span.
Yeah. What is index?
0.
Nope.
Oh wow.
It's the
Starts
number
off
that
at
you
0.
send it.
It starts off as 0. Where are we getting index?
From the grapher, the main class.
No, we're not getting it from another class. Find where do we declare index?
At the head of the class. Nope, in two-string method.
Yeah.
And where do we set it to a value?
Here.
In the for loop. So what is index?
Is the counter.
And do we have another counter up here?
I.
Yeah.
So
So we could do range span times I.
Yeah, don't copy and paste, just type it.
+1. Right? +1.
Yeah, so now let's see.
Isn't it plus range span?
Yeah, so we're saying what does it need to be less than?
Okay, sorry.
And we could also, mathematically, that's the same as saying range span times
Do I
I
need
plus 1.
parentheses around this or no? No.
No, order of operations would say left to right, that works.
Less than.
Now,
Greater
okay,
than-
so
greater than.
let's say in our first time we run this through, range span is 10 and I is 0. So what's 10 times 0
0 is 0.
plus 10?
10.
So while whatever is on our list is less than 10, is that what we want?
The first time, yes.
Are you sure? If it's less than 10,
Less than or equal to.
less than or equal to 10, because we want to include the possibility of 10.
Okay.
And now what's our second condition?
And greater than range span.
What is greater than range span plus index times index plus 1?
List values on.
List values at I. No, so, okay, hold on.
Oh,
And
yeah.
list values. I is greater than range span times index. What is index? Okay, so now, still in our first one, so I equals 0. So the value in the first spot is greater than 10 times 0 plus 1. That's, I don't think that's what you meant to write.
Plus, hold on, which one? This one? Or the first one?
Okay, so while it's greater than,
Yeah.
it has to be greater than 0 plus 1. So it has to be greater than 1. Is that true?
It could be 0.
It can't be 0 because all the numbers are between 1 and something.
Oh,
But it can be 1.
it's greater than or equal
Greater than or equal
Yes, that should be greater than or equal to as well. So now we're saying, all right, if the value in this spot is between the current range I'm talking about, now what do I want to do?
to. You want to add that, like, add 1 to that range.
Yes, how do I do that?
Range. No. You can't do range dot add.
No, I don't want to add another value to ranges. I want to increment one of the values that's already there.
You want to
List
increment the
values
first
I.
one.
I want not necessarily the first one. The first time I want it to be the first
Yeah, but
This-
that one that you're in,
one. Which one am I in?
List values I.
whichever.
Not list values I.
I.
How many times have I gone through this loop?
Okay.
I times.
I times. So if they correspond to the values, this is why it's important to understand the difference between list values at I and I, because now I can say, also look at ranges at the spot I. Now what kind of data structure is ranges? Is it an array?
It's an array list.
It's an array list. So can I access a value in it the same way I would access a value in an array?
No.
No. So how do I get a value at that
Oh,
spot?
You have to do,
There's no get value.
it's like the get like, no, like, it's like where you have to have, that's too
It's
big,
like
right?
Java library.
Yeah, I don't know. You guys decided to do an array list. How does one get a value from an array list?
It's helping do both.
So let's see what people on the internet have to say. The result that you just found is from a website called Stack Overflow, which is a forum. People ask questions and then someone else can answer them. So you don't necessarily want to look at the question as the right way. You want to look at the answers.
Get,
Dot get.
dot get.
Yeah. If I wasn't sure about this, hit back for me. Where else can I go? Instead of Googling the whole question, how to retrieve a value from array list in Java,
Array
Well-
list.
why don't I just Google or Java array list? That'll bring us to the Java library, and we can see in the Oracle documentation, let's scroll down a bit, all of the methods that I have in my array list. Because I have a feeling I'm going to need at least one more, so let's take a look. I found get returns the element at the specified position in the list. What am I going to need to do once I get that?
You're gonna have to add. You're gonna have to add two ranges.
Yeah, can I say whatever my ranges dot get I equals +1?
No.
No, so how do I set it to something?
What do you mean? Dot. You use dot set.
I don't know. Is there a dot set?
Replaces the element at the set. You get it.
Dot set replaces the element at the specified position on the list, in the list with the specified element. Yeah, that seems really good to me. So it looks like we're going to need to get it and set it, right?
Mhm.
So let's switch back.
Get. Can you do dot get I dot set I or just
Dot get at I. So what are we actually doing?